Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding that the price of bread has doubled overnight. You'd panic. Politicians would rush to microphones. Economists would flood TV screens. Everyone would scream, inflation. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even when the panic fades, even when the headlines calm down, inflation never really leaves. It hides, it lingers, it waits, and it shapes your life in ways you don't even notice. This is not a story about numbers on a chart. It's about a system that quietly makes sure prices creep upward decade after decade. Why does this matter right now? Because every time you hear promises that inflation will be fixed, you're hearing a half-truth. Governments fight inflation. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates. But the deeper reality is that inflation is built into the way modern economies work. It's not a bug, it's the design. Let's rewind. The year is 1970. A bottle of Coke costs 10 cents in the United States. A gallon of gas was about 36 cents. Fast forward to today, that Coke is $2. That gallon of gas? Anywhere from $3 to $5, depending on the week. Did the Coke change? Did the gas change? Not really. What changed was the value of money itself. Money is not fixed. It's elastic. It stretches, shrinks, bends under pressure. And inflation is the name we give to that slow bending. Here's the hidden math. Every time a government spends more than it earns, it borrows. Every time the Federal Reserve prints new money, it dilutes the old money. Every time wages rise, businesses raise prices to cover costs. It's a cycle, and cycles don't stop. So even when inflation looks under control, the upward creep continues. A loaf of bread that cost $1.50 in 2000 now costs $4. That's not temporary, that's permanent. Politicals love to say, we will bring inflation down. And sometimes they do. Prices stop rising so fast. Charts look calmer. But notice this, prices almost never go back down. When inflation slows, it doesn't mean bread is cheaper. It means bread is still expensive, just not rising as quickly. That's the cruel joke. Inflation is sticky. It clings. Think about your savings. If you hide $10,000 under your mattress today, in 10 years it will buy less. Not because someone stole it, not because you spent it, but because inflation quietly ate it. This is why people invest. This is why governments panic. Because inflation is not just about prices, it's about power. It decides who gets richer, who gets poorer, who survives, and who struggles. It's almost absurd. We live in a world where politicians celebrate low inflation as if it means victory. Meanwhile, you're still paying more for groceries, more for gas, more for rent. Low inflation doesn't mean cheap life. It means expensive life, just rising slower. So why does inflation never really go away? Because economies are built on growth. Growth requires more money. More money means dilution. Dilution means inflation. It's like a shadow. You can't erase it. You can only manage how dark it looks. We all know this simple truth. Inflation is sticky. It clings. It never really leaves. But now let's peel back the layers and see the hidden mechanics that keep it alive, even when governments swear they've defeated it. Because inflation is not just about rising prices, it's about choices. Choices made by governments, banks, and even you. Start with governments. Every modern government spends more than it earns. Taxes bring in revenue, but spending always overshoots. Highways, schools, defense, subsidies, salaries. The gap is filled with borrowing. Borrowing means debt. Debt means bonds, and bonds are promises backed by future money. Here's the trick. When governments borrow, they don't just take existing money, they create new money. The Federal Reserve buys bonds. Banks lend against them, and suddenly more money is in circulation. More money chasing the same goods, prices rise. That's inflation. Now, banks. Banks are the quiet engines of inflation. Every loan they issue is new money. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards. None of that money existed before. It's created with a keystroke. But when loans are repaid, that money disappears. So banks must keep lending to keep the system alive. Constant lending means constant money creation. Constant money creation means constant inflationary pressure. It's like a treadmill. You can slow it down, but you can't step off. Now, let's look at wages. Imagine a factory worker earns $3,000 a month. Prices rise. He demands $3,600. The company agrees. But now the company's costs are higher, so it raises the price of its goods. Consumers pay more. Workers demand more. The cycle repeats. This is called the wage price spiral, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. Politicians love to announce inflation is under control. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates, borrowing slows, prices stop rising so fast. But notice what doesn't happen. Prices don't fall back to where they were. Rent doesn't drop. Gas doesn't return to old levels. Bread doesn't shrink back to yesterday's price. Inflation under control just means the fire is burning slower. The ashes remain. Now zoom out. Inflation is not just local, it's global. When America prints dollars, the ripple hits Europe. When Europe raises rates, the shockwaves reach Asia. Because currencies are linked, trade is linked, debt is linked. So even if one country fights inflation, another country's choices can reignite it. It's almost absurd. We live in a world where central banks pretend to be firefighters. They raise rates, cut spending, and declare victory. Meanwhile, the fire never really goes out. It just smolders, waiting for the next spark. And here's the part most people miss. Inflation is not just created by governments and banks, it's created by us. When we demand higher wages, when we borrow for houses, cars, weddings, when we spend more than we save, each choice adds pressure. Each choice feeds the cycle. So why does inflation never really go away? Because the system is designed to grow. Growth requires more money. More money requires borrowing. Borrowing requires debt. Debt requires repayment. And repayment requires more money. It's a loop, and inflation is the shadow of that loop. We've seen the mechanics. Governments borrow, banks lend, workers demand, consumers spend, and inflation breathes through all of it. The question now is, if inflation is permanent, what happens when the system itself begins to strain? Inflation punishes savers. If you keep cash under your mattress, it shrinks in value every year. What bought you a week's worth of groceries last year might only buy you half as much next year. But inflation rewards borrowers. If you owe $100,000 on a mortgage today and inflation rises, that debt becomes easier to pay tomorrow because the money you repay is worth less than the money you borrowed. So inflation quietly shifts wealth from savers to borrowers, from cautious families to risk-taking businesses, from ordinary people to governments drowning in debt. Look at history. After World War II, the United States was buried in debt. Inflation helped it escape. Prices rose, wages rose, debt shrank in real terms. Leaders celebrated growth. But what really happened was inflation eating away at the burden. Fast forward to today, nations carry trillions in debt. America, Europe, Asia. Inflation is not their enemy, it's their tool. It makes debt manageable. It keeps the treadmill running. So when leaders say they are fighting inflation, remember this: they need it. Without inflation, debt suffocates economies. We're told inflation is dangerous, And it is, but it's also useful. It's the quiet tax governments never vote on. It's the invisible hand that reduces debt without a single law passed. That's the irony. Inflation is hated in public, but loved in private. Now think about the global economy. Inflation in one country spills into another. When America prints dollars, Europe feels it. When China raises wages, the ripple hits U.S. imports. Currencies are linked. Trade is linked. Debt is linked. Inflation is global. And in a global system built on debt, inflation is the glue. Without it, the system cracks. With it, the system survives, but at a cost. It's almost absurd. We live in a world where central banks pretend to be heroes, slaying the dragon of inflation. Meanwhile, they secretly feed it, because without the dragon, the castle collapses. So what does permanent inflation mean for the future of money? It means cash will always lose value. It means wages will always chase prices. It means savings must always fight erosion. It also means power will always tilt toward those who borrow, spend, and control debt. Governments, corporations, banks, and ordinary people? They adapt, they invest, they hustle, they survive in a system where inflation is not a visitor, but a resident. Inflation never really goes away because it's not just about prices, it's about survival. It's about debt. It's about the design of the system itself. So the next time you hear a politician promise to end inflation, ask yourself, can they really end something the system depends on? Or is inflation not a problem to be solved, but a shadow we must learn to live with? We've walked through the stickiness of inflation. We've seen the mechanics, the politics, the irony. But now, let's step into the future, because permanent inflation doesn't just shape today's prices, it shapes tomorrow's world. And the question is not whether inflation will return, it's how it will transform the very idea of money. Think about digital currencies. The Federal Reserve and other central banks are experimenting with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. They promise efficiency, transparency, control, but underneath, the same inflationary engine hums. Digital or paper, money is still elastic. It still bends under debt, under borrowing, under growth. Inflation doesn't vanish with technology. It adapts. Now think about cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin was born as hard money designed to resist inflation. Fixed supply, no printing. But notice what happened. Prices swing wildly. Speculation replaces stability. And even in crypto, inflation sneaks in, not through supply, but through demand, hype, and leverage. Global debt today is over $300 trillion. That number is so large it barely makes sense. No country can repay it in full. No system can unwind it cleanly. So what happens? Inflation. Quietly, steadily, debt shrinks in real terms. Governments breathe easier. Savers lose value. Borrowers escape. It's the same trick, just scaled up to the entire planet. We're told innovation will solve inflation. Digital money, smarter policies, better data. But the reality is simpler. Inflation is not a bug to fix. It's the cost of running a system built on debt and growth. You can slow it, you can disguise it, but you can't erase it. Now imagine the next crisis, a housing bubble in the U.S. market, a sovereign debt default in Europe, a war that disrupts global trade routes. Each shock triggers money creation, each wave fuels inflation, and each time the cycle repeats. Prices rise, wages chase, debt shrinks, savers lose, borrowers win. It's not just economics, it's survival. It's almost absurd. We live in a world where inflation is treated like a villain, yet every hero secretly needs it. Governments need it to shrink debt. Banks need it to keep lending. Corporations need it to raise prices. So the villain is also the lifeline. Permanent inflation means the future of money is not about stability, it's about adaptation. Ordinary Americans will keep finding ways to protect themselves, investing in stocks, buying homes, diversifying savings. Governments will keep balancing debt with inflation. The Federal Reserve will keep pretending to fight while quietly feeding the fire. And the global economy will keep running on a shadow that never leaves. We began with bread. We ended with the future of money. Inflation never really goes away because it's not just about prices, it's about the design of the system.